A colleague gave me a ride home. One offhand sentence. That's all it took to unravel 12 years of marriage. But the worst part wasn't what my wife was doing behind my back. It was what a doctor told me 3 weeks later. My name is Edwin Hollins. I'm 42 years old. I run operations for a mid-sized restaurant chain based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. 7 locations, 40-plus staff, enough moving parts to keep my brain occupied from 6 in the morning until well past dinner. Ella is 39, works in marketing for a regional healthcare company downtown. We have a daughter named Mia, 9 years old, sharp as a tack and full of energy. Our life, on paper, looks solid. House in a good neighborhood, decent savings, date nights every other Friday. The kind of setup that makes people at cookouts say, "You two are goals." Goals. Right. It started on a Thursday evening in late October. I'd wrapped up a supply meeting with a vendor out in Concord, and my truck was in for brake work. Bad timing, as usual. My colleague Reed Garner, who handles vendor contracts for 2 of our locations, offered to swing me back toward the city. Reed's a straight shooter, mid-40s, not the type to gossip or stir the pot. That's exactly why what he said hit differently. We were 20 minutes into the drive, talking about a supplier who'd been shorting us on produce weights, when Reed went quiet for a second. Then he said, almost like he was thinking out loud, "Hey, random question. Does Ella still drive that white Acura? The MDX?" I glanced over at him. "Yeah, why?" Reed kept his eyes on the road. "Saw a car matching the description parked outside Meridian Grill 2 nights ago. Tuesday. I was dropping off paperwork for the evening manager. Noticed it because the parking sticker on the back. Same gym Carla goes to." He paused. There was a guy with her. Didn't think much of it. Just figured it was a work thing. I said nothing for a moment. What did he look like? Reed shrugged. Tall. Dark jacket. They were walking in together, close. I nodded slowly and changed the subject. But something inside me had already shifted. Quiet and invisible, like a fault line adjusting beneath still ground. I always trusted Ella completely. And it took one ride with a business partner to begin unraveling 12 years of certainty. When I got home that night, Ella was on the couch with a glass of wine, watching something on her laptop with earbuds in. She pulled one out and smiled at me. That easy, practice smile. "Long day." "Yeah," I said. "Supply meeting ran over. Dinner's in the fridge. I made that lemon chicken you like." I went to the kitchen. I heated the plate. I ate standing at the counter, staring at the window above the sink while the neighborhood outside went dark. She came in briefly to refill her wine, kissed my shoulder, and went back to the couch. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly, precisely normal. That was the part that got me. I thought about Tuesday night. I hadn't asked Ella about Tuesday. Not yet. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through her texts from that evening. She'd messaged me at 6:47 p.m., staying a bit late, quarterly review prep. Don't wait up. Meridian Grill was 12 minutes from her office. Meridian Grill was also not cheap. Not the kind of place you grab a quick bite during a work crunch. It was the kind of place you went when you wanted the evening to feel like something. I didn't confront her. Not that night. I wasn't ready. I needed more than Reed's offhand observation. I needed to know if my gut was reacting to something real, or if I was about to blow up my marriage over a parking lot coincidence. So I did what any man in my position does when he's not ready to face the answer. I made a mental note, said good night to my wife, and lay in the dark next to her listening to her breathe. Sleep didn't come easy, but decision did. I was going to find out what was really going on, quietly, carefully, and without showing a single card until I had the whole hand. The next 3 days, I said nothing. I smiled at breakfast. I asked about her meetings. I helped Mia with her homework while Ella sat on the couch, scrolling her phone. Normal. Routine. Exactly what she expected from me. But I was listening now. Really listening. Not the half-present, nod and move on kind of listening I've been doing for years. I mean the kind where you catch the half-second pause before an answer. Where you notice the slight shift in someone's eyes when they're reaching for a story rather than a memory. Ella's alibi structure was clean. Too clean. Every evening she was away, she had a reason. Always reasonable. Always just vague enough to not invite follow-up. Wednesday had been quarterly review prep. Thursday was happy hour with Denise. The following Monday was gym, then groceries. I checked the grocery receipt she left on the counter. $51. 2 bags. She'd been gone 3 hours. I started testing the edges. Gently, casually, the way you press on a bruise to figure out how deep it goes. Didn't you say Denise was out of town this month? I asked over coffee one morning, keeping my eyes on my mug. Ella didn't miss a beat. That's next week. She pushed it back. Right, I said. I forgot. She didn't even look up from her phone. I thought about Reed's observation every single day. That white Acura. The man in the dark jacket. Clothes. Walking in together. I replayed the words like a song I couldn't get out of my head. And underneath the replay, one question kept surfacing. How long? The following Friday, I told Ella I had to fly to Nashville for an emergency operations issue at our location there. I even packed a bag, drove to the airport, parked in short term, sat in the terminal for 40 minutes, had a coffee, then turned around and drove back to Charlotte. I parked 3 blocks from Meridian Grill at 6:15 p.m. By 7:02, Ella's white Acura pulled into the lot. She stepped out in that charcoal wrap dress I hadn't seen in months, heels I didn't recognize, hair down. She checked herself in the side mirror before she walked to the entrance. Not a quick check, a deliberate one. He arrived 8 minutes later. Tall, mid-30s, athletic build, confident in the way men are confident when they've never had a reason not to be. He didn't touch her outside. Didn't need to. The way she turned toward him said everything. Open, warm, leaning in before he'd even reached her. They went inside together. I sat in my truck and breathed. I didn't go in. I stayed in that parking lot for 2 hours and 40 minutes. When they came out, she was laughing at something he'd said, her hand briefly touching his arm before she caught herself and pulled it back. Old habit, new discipline. She knew the difference between outside and inside behavior. She didn't scan the lot. She didn't look over her shoulder. She walked to her car like a woman with nothing to account for. I drove home the long way. When I got there, the lights were off. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a while, thinking about Mia, asleep upstairs. About the bedtime story I'd read her the night before. About the fingerprint drawings she'd taped to the fridge with mismatched magnets. I wasn't ready to blow this up yet. Not without knowing the full shape of what I was dealing with. The next morning I made a call. A private investigator named Tom Shea, referred by a former colleague who'd been through something similar 3 years ago. We met at a diner near my office. He was quiet, professional, asked the right questions and none of the wrong ones. I gave him dates, the name of the restaurant, the description of the man. He said he'd have preliminary information within 10 days. One more thing, I told him before we parted. I need to know about a company event about 10 years ago. My wife worked at Renfield Health Group. There was a Christmas party or something similar. I need to know who was at that event with her. Specifically, who her direct supervisor was at the time. Tom looked at me steadily. You think it goes back that far? I think, I said carefully, that there are questions I should have asked a long time ago. He nodded and wrote it down. I paid for both coffees, walked back to my car, and sat behind the wheel for a long moment before starting the engine. I was no longer a husband trying to figure out if his wife was lying. I was a man building a case, and I intended to build it right. Tom Shea called me 9 days later, not with a report, with a request to meet in person. That told me something before he said a single word. We sat in the same diner near my office. He ordered black coffee. I ordered nothing. He slid a manila folder across the table and let me open it myself. The man's name was Owen Marsh, 38 years old, sales consultant for a commercial real estate firm downtown. Married. His wife's name was Nadine. No children. The folder had a printed photo, timestamp surveillance. Owen and Ella walking into Meridian Grill. Another shot from a different evening outside a wine bar on South End. A third one, the one that made my jaw tighten, taken through a restaurant window. Ella's hand across the table, her fingers resting on top of his. How long? I asked. Tom wrapped both hands around his mug. Based on what I could establish, at least 7 months. Possibly longer. They're careful, but not invisible. Same 2 or 3 locations. Always weekday evenings, never weekends. Never weekends. Because weekends were for family. For Mia. For me. I closed the folder. What about the other thing I asked you to look into? Renfield Health Group. The company event 10 years ago. Tom nodded slowly. That took some doing. He pulled a second sheet from his jacket pocket, printed email records, a staff directory from a company event, a name circled in blue pen. Her direct supervisor at the time of the annual retreat, 11 years ago, to be exact, was a man named Kurt Strickland. Senior Marketing Director. 44 now. Still in the area. Runs his own consulting firm out of Ballantyne. I stare at the name. Was there any indication they were close? Outside of work. Close enough that two former colleagues I spoke to, off the record, remembered them being inseparable at that retreat. One described it as, Tom glanced at his notes, the kind of close that makes people uncomfortable at work the following Monday. I sat back in the booth. Ella had come home from that retreat on a Sunday night. I remembered it clearly because I'd picked her up from the airport. She'd looked tired and quiet in a way I'd chalked up to a long weekend. We'd stopped for food on the way home. She'd barely eaten. She told me she was just exhausted. Mia was born 8 months, and 3 weeks later. I thanked Tom. I paid for coffee. I walked to my truck and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine for a long time. The math was already running in my head. The kind of math you don't want to do, but can't stop once it starts. That night, I ordered a home DNA kit online. 2-day shipping. I used a separate email account and a prepaid card I'd picked up at a pharmacy on the way home. When Ella asked what I was doing on my laptop, I told her I was reviewing vendor invoices. She nodded and went back to her show. I watched her from the corner of my eye and felt something quietly close inside me, like a door shutting in a part of my chest I hadn't known was still open. Whatever came next, I was going to face it with both eyes open and every fact in hand. The kit arrived on a Wednesday while Ella was at work and Mia was at school. I signed for her at the door, went straight to the kitchen, and read the instructions twice before I did anything else. The process was straightforward. I used a swab from my own cheek. For Mia's sample, a second swab, taken from her toothbrush in the bathroom she used every morning. The instructions said that was acceptable. I sealed both samples in the labeled pouches, registered the kit number online using the separate email, and drove to the post office during my lunch break. Then I waited. 12 days felt like 12 months. I kept my routine intact. Every morning, I made coffee for two. Every evening, I asked Ella about her day and listened to answers that were smooth and unremarkable. I watched her interact with Mia, the way she helped her with her backpack, braided her hair on Thursday mornings, called her Bug, in that easy, affectionate tone. Ella was a good mother. I had never doubted that. But a good mother and an honest wife were not always the same person. I also scheduled something else during those 12 days, something I've been avoiding for reasons I couldn't fully explain, even to myself. I called a men's health clinic on the east side of Charlotte and booked a complete fertility evaluation. When I arrived, the doctor, a quiet, methodical man in his early 50s, asked me a standard set of questions about our history. How long had we been trying before our daughter? What results, if any, we'd sought from medical professionals at the time. I told him we hadn't seen anyone, that we just kept trying, and eventually it worked. He asked if I'd like to proceed with a full panel. I said yes. The results came back 4 days later. I sat in the examination room and listened to the doctor explain, in measured clinical language, that my sperm count was severely below normal, in the lowest 2% of men tested at this clinic. He used words like motility and morphology and subfertility. He said that natural conception, in my case, was not impossible, but that the statistical probability was, in his professional opinion, extremely low. Less than 2%, he said. Perhaps significantly less, depending on additional factors. I asked him plainly, could a man with these results have fathered a child naturally, without medical intervention? He was quiet for a moment. It's not something I can rule out entirely, he said carefully. But I would be doing you a disservice if I called it likely. I thanked him. I got in my truck. I drove to a park near my office and sat on a bench by the pond for 40 minutes without moving. Less than 2%. Mia was 9 years old. I had coached her t-ball team. I had held her hand during every thunderstorm. I had read her the same 3 picture books, so many times I could recite them from memory. I had been her father in every way I knew how to be. And now a clinical report was telling me that her existence, the way it happened, the timing, the story I'd been handed, didn't add up. The DNA kit results arrived 2 days later. I opened the envelope alone at my kitchen table, the house empty, the afternoon light coming flat and gray through the blinds. I read the result once. Then I set the paper down flat on the table and pressed both palms against the surface, breathing steadily. Probability of paternity, 0%. I stood up, walked to the garage, picked up a ceramic planter that had been sitting on the workbench since last spring, the one Ella had bought and never used, and hurled it against the concrete wall. It shattered into a dozen pieces. I stood there looking at the fragments on the floor, chest heaving, fists clenched. Then I bent down, picked up every piece, dropped them in the trash, and went back inside. I sat at the kitchen table again. I looked at Mia's drawing on the fridge. Her name written in purple crayon in the bottom right corner, letters still a little uneven. I picked up my phone and called Daniel Mercer. "I need to meet," I said when he answered. "Soon. I have everything." I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not yet. The DNA results sat in my jacket's interior pocket for 3 days like a coal burning through the lining, and I went about my life as if nothing had changed. I reviewed staffing reports. I handled a vendor dispute at our uptown location. I made pancakes on Saturday morning and cut Mia's into triangles the way she liked. Normal. Steady. The face of a man who had not just watched his entire understanding of the last 9 years come apart at the seams. It was a Tuesday afternoon pickup at Mia's school that undid me. I arrived early, unusual for me, but I'd left work late that day. I waited near the main entrance with a handful of other parents, hands in my pockets, half watching the doors. When they opened and the kids came streaming out, I spotted Mia immediately. Purple backpack, one pigtail already half loose, the way it always was by end of day. She was walking beside another girl. Taller, dark-haired, same age. They were laughing about something, heads together. As they got closer, I caught the girl's profile and felt something go rigid in my chest. The cheekbones, the set of the eyes, the way her brow tilted slightly when she laughed. I'd seen that face before, in the folder Tom, Shay had put on the diner table. Mia stopped in front of me and grabbed my hand. "Dad, this is Sophie. We're in the same reading group." Sophie looked up at me and smiled politely. "Hi." "Hi, Sophie," I said. My voice came out level. I don't know how. On the drive home, Mia told me Sophie's dad was some kind of business consultant and that he sometimes picked Sophie up on Tuesdays. I nodded and asked follow-up questions I barely heard the answers to. My hand stayed steady on the wheel. Inside, I was already doing the arithmetic that no father should have to do. Sophie Strickland. Same school. Same reading group. Same face. That night, after Mia was asleep, I went to the garage. I stood at the workbench and picked up a ceramic bowl that had been sitting there since last summer. One of Ella's decorating projects she'd abandoned halfway through. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I hurled it against the far wall. It burst apart with a sharp report against the concrete. I stood there watching the pieces settle on the floor, chest heaving, jaw locked. Then I cleaned it up. Every fragment. Swept the dust into the trash. Turned off the garage light and went inside. I didn't sleep much that night. But by morning, I had made a decision about Kurt Strickland. I went back to Tom Shea first. I needed one more piece. Kurt's current routine, his office address, whether he was aware that Mia existed. Tom turned it around in 4 days. Kurt Strickland ran a marketing consultancy out of a suite in Ballantyne. Married 15 years, 2 kids, a son, 12, and a daughter, 9. His daughter's name was Sophie. I read that line twice. Tom's report noted no indication that Strickland had any knowledge of Mia or of Ella's pregnancy from 11 years ago. As far as anyone could tell, he had walked away from that retreat and moved forward with his career and his family without ever looking back. I sat with that information for 2 days. I thought about what it meant to tell him. I thought about what it meant not to. I thought about Mia, sitting in a classroom next to a half-sister she didn't know existed, laughing over a reading assignment. And I thought about Ella, who had known all of this, who had come home from that retreat quiet and pale. I said she was just tired. Who had told me a few weeks later, with bright eyes and shaking hands, that she was pregnant. Who had watched me turn into a father, fully, completely, without reservation, while carrying a secret that could have unraveled everything from day one. I thought about that for a long time. Then I called Daniel Mercer and told him I was ready to move. Daniel Mercer's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Tryon Street. Clean, quiet, the kind of place that smelled like leather and careful thinking. He was a compact man in his early 50s, precise, unhurried, the type who let you finish your sentences before he responded. I'd been referred to him by a colleague 2 years ago and never thought I'd actually need him. I laid everything on his desk. Tom Shea's reports, the DNA result, the medical panel from the fertility clinic, the time-stamped photographs of Ella and Owen Marsh. Daniel read through it without expression, making occasional notes in the margin of a yellow legal pad. When he finished, he looked up. "This is thorough," he said. "You've done the groundwork well. I want to know where I stand." I told him. All of it. The marriage, the paternity, what the court could do. Daniel set his pen down. On the marriage, given documented adultery, North Carolina is a fault state for divorce purposes if you choose to pursue it. The evidence you have is strong. He paused. On the paternity, this is where it gets complicated. You've been the legal father for 9 years. Even with a DNA result of 0, the court may not automatically sever that status. You could be required to continue financial support regardless of biology, depending on how the case is argued. I stared at him. So I could be legally responsible for a child that isn't mine because I didn't know she wasn't mine? In several states, including this one, that's a very real possibility, Daniel said evenly. It's not a given, but it's a risk. Her attorney could argue established paternal relationship, emotional bond, best interests of the child. The air in the room felt thick. I exhaled slowly. What about the biological father? Kurt Strickland. Daniel nodded. If you choose to notify him, and if he acknowledges paternity, voluntarily or through a court-ordered test, that changes the landscape considerably. A confirmed biological father in the picture shifts legal and financial responsibility in your direction. I want him notified, I said. Daniel made a note. I can draft a formal letter through my office, or you can do it personally. I'd recommend through counsel. Keeps it clean. Through you, I said. Keep it clean. He nodded. We spent another hour going through the specifics. Asset division, the house, joint accounts, the timeline for filing. When I stood to leave, Daniel extended his hand. One more thing, I said before shaking it. Her attorney is going to argue that I knew, or should have known, that there were fertility questions and that I tacitly accepted the situation. Daniel's expression didn't shift. I've heard that argument before. We'll be ready for it. You have the medical records. You have the documentation that you never underwent any evaluation prior to the pregnancy. That's not tacit acceptance. That's a husband who trusted his wife. A husband who trusted his wife. I shook his hand and left. On the drive home, I took the long route, through the older neighborhoods where the oak trees still had their leaves. I thought about Mia. I thought about what I was going to do about the fact that I loved her completely, without qualification, and also could not stay inside the lie that had built her place in my life. The two things didn't cancel each other out, but they couldn't coexist forever, either. I had to choose what kind of man I was going to be on the other side of this, and I already knew the answer. I chose a Friday evening, not because it was dramatic, not because I wanted a scene, but because Mia had a sleepover at her friend's house, and I needed the house empty of everything that mattered before I opened the door to what was coming. I spent that afternoon methodically. I pulled Ella's clothes from the closet, dresses, blouses, the shoes lined up on the lower rack, and packed them into 2 large suitcases. Not recklessly, not with anger driving my hands. Deliberately. Folded where folding made sense, stacked where it didn't. I left her jewelry in the bathroom drawer because some of it had been her grandmother's, and I wasn't going to be the kind of man who used sentiment as a weapon. I pulled her toiletries from the cabinet under the sink and set them in a tote bag beside the suitcases. I left her side of the closet open and bare. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with a glass of water and waited. She walked in at 6:42 p.m. I heard the garage door, heard her keys hit the bowl by the door, heard the familiar rhythm of her heels on the tile. She came into the kitchen already talking, something about traffic on the interstate, and stopped mid-sentence when she saw the suitcases standing by the hallway entrance. The color shifted in her face. Just slightly. Just enough. "What is this?" she asked. "Sit down, Ella," I said. She didn't sit. She stayed where she was, one hand still holding her bag strap, eyes moving between me and the luggage. "Edwin, what is going on?" I set 3 items on the table in front of me. Tom Shea's photo report, the DNA result, the medical panel from the clinic. I placed them in a row, evenly spaced, and looked up at her. "Oh, Marsh," I said. 7 months that I know of. Probably longer. She opened her mouth. I held up one hand. The DNA result. I continued, keeping my voice level and steady. "Mia is not my biological daughter. Probability of paternity, 0. Something moved through her expression. Not guilt, not grief. Something more complicated and harder to name. She set her bag down slowly on the counter. In the medical report, I finished. My fertility numbers. Less than 2% probability of natural conception. Which means you knew, or should have known, that there was a serious question about Mia's parentage. And you said nothing. For 9 years. The silence between us had weight to it. She stood very still. Then she said, quietly, you stopped being present. You were always at work, always managing someone else's problem. I was invisible in this marriage long before Owen. That's not a confession, I said. That's a deflection. Try again. Her jaw tightened. You want me to apologize for surviving a marriage where I felt completely alone. I want you to acknowledge, I said evenly, that you came home from a corporate retreat 11 years ago, knowing you might be pregnant by your supervisor, and you let me raise that child for 9 years without ever telling me the truth. That's not loneliness, Ella. That's a choice. A deliberate, sustained choice. She looked away. A muscle in her jaw moved. And while you were processing your loneliness, I added, you were apparently finding time to see Owen Marsh on Tuesday evenings. Meridian Grill. The wine bar on South End. Any of that ring a bell? She looked back at me then. Her eyes were dry. That told me something. You had me followed. I had the truth followed, I said. It led me to you. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat. She folded her hands on the table. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled, measured in a way that told me she'd thought about this conversation, at least in some version, before tonight. So what now? You throw me out and play the victim? I'm not playing anything, I replied. I'm ending a marriage that was built on a foundation you hollowed out before it was even finished. You're leaving tonight. The suitcases are packed. I left your grandmother's jewelry. It's in the bathroom drawer. You can't just. I already spoke with Daniel Mercer, I said. Papers are being prepared. Fault-based, adultery documented. You'll hear from his office early next week. I paused. I also want you to know that Kurt Strickland has been notified. Through my attorney. He'll be receiving a formal letter and a copy of the DNA result. That landed. She went very still for the first time since she'd walked in. The controlled composure she'd been maintaining shifted. Not into tears, but into something colder. Something that looked like calculation interrupted. You had no right, she said low and tight. He has a daughter in Mia's class. I replied. He has the right to know. And frankly, so does his wife. She stood up. She grabbed her bag from the counter. She looked at the suitcases, then back at me. And for a moment I thought she might say something. Something real. Something that acknowledged the actual shape of what she'd done. But she didn't. She picked up one suitcase handle, left the second one, and walked toward the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. Without turning around, she said, You were never going to be enough, Edwin. I looked at her back. Maybe not, I said, but I was always honest. There's a difference. The door closed behind her. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. Not the quiet of a family winding down for the night, but the quiet of a space that had finally stopped pretending. I picked up my phone and texted Mia. Sleep well, bug. See you tomorrow. Her response came back in under a minute. A string of emojis and a hand-drawn heart photographed with her friend's tablet. I set the phone down. I breathed. And for the first time in weeks, the air in the room felt like it belonged to me. The weekend passed quietly. I picked Mia up from her sleepover Saturday morning, made her favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast with the crust cut off, and spent the afternoon at the park throwing a frisbee until my arm ached. She didn't ask where her mother was. Kids carry more awareness than we give them credit for, and Mia had always been perceptive beyond her years. She'd ask when she was ready. I'd answer honestly, in the way a 9-year-old needed to hear it, when that moment came. Sunday evening, I was reviewing the draft separation agreement Daniel had emailed when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I almost let go to voicemail. Something made me answer. Is this Edwin Hollins? The voice was a woman's, steady, but with something underneath it that sounded like a person holding themselves together through force of will. It is, I said. A short pause. My name is Nadine Marsh. I think you know why I'm calling. I set down the laptop. Yes, I do. Another pause, longer this time. I found the letter from your attorney's office this morning. Owen left it on the kitchen counter. I don't know if he forgot it was there or if he wanted me to see it. I read it twice before I called him at work. Her voice remained controlled, but barely. He didn't deny it. I'm sorry, I said. And I meant it. not as a formality, but as one person to another who understood exactly the specific weight of that kind of morning. How long did you know? She asked. About 3 weeks with certainty, I told her. I had suspicions before that. A colleague saw them together. That's what started it. She was quiet for a moment. 7 months, he told me. He said it was 7 months. She let out a short, humorless breath. I believed him when he said it was nothing last spring. He told me I was imagining things. That phrase hit somewhere familiar. They're good at that, I said. Yes. A pause. I wanted to call you because I don't know exactly. Because I thought you deserved to know it wasn't just your marriage falling apart. And because I wanted to hear from someone who'd already been through the worst part of finding out. She stopped. Does it get easier? Knowing. I thought about that honestly before I answered. Knowing is actually the easier part, I said. It's the not knowing that grinds you down. Once you know, you can move. You can make decisions. You have ground under your feet again. She absorbed that. Your daughter, she said carefully. I read the letter. I understand there's more to this than just Owen. There is, I confirmed. But I'm handling it. Is she okay? Nadine asked. Your daughter. The question surprised me. Not its content, but its kindness. She's good, I said. She's resilient. She's 9, and she throws a frisbee better than I do. So, I think she's going to be fine. A small, genuine sound on the line. Almost a laugh, almost not. I hope so, Nadine said quietly. I hope you both are. We said goodbye shortly after. No exchange of information. No plans to speak again. Just two people who'd been living adjacent to the same deception, briefly sharing the weight of it before each going back to carry their own. I sat for a while after the call. Then I opened Daniel's email again and read the draft agreement carefully, making notes in the margins where I had questions. 3 days later, Daniel called to tell me that Kurt Strickland had contacted his office. He wasn't contesting the DNA result. He was, however, requesting time to consult with his own attorney before responding formally. He's not running, Daniel told me. In my experience, that means he's going to engage. Good, I said. That same week, Ella's attorney sent a preliminary response to our filing. It included, as Daniel had anticipated, the argument that I had tacitly accepted an uncertain paternity situation by never seeking medical evaluation during our years of trying to conceive. It was worded carefully and argued with precision. Daniel called me after he read it. They're going to push this angle hard, he said. But your medical records are clean. You went to that clinic on your own initiative, with no prior testing on record. That's not a man who accepted uncertainty. That's a man who trusted his wife. So we push back, I said. We push back, Daniel confirmed. And we win. I trusted him. I had learned recently, in the most expensive way possible, the difference between trust that was earned and trust that was simply assumed. Daniel Mercer had earned his. The divorce proceedings moved the way Daniel had promised, methodically, without shortcuts, and with every document in its proper place. Ella's attorney pushed the tacit acceptance argument for 3 weeks before Daniel dismantled it in a written response that was, in his words, surgical. My medical records showed no prior fertility evaluation at any point during our marriage. No counseling, no clinical referral, no record of any kind that I had ever been informed or invited to question Mia's parentage. A man who had simply trusted his wife and been given no reason to do otherwise. The fault-based adultery filing stood. The photographs from Tom Shea's surveillance, combined with the time-stamped evidence, left Ella's side with very little room to maneuver on that front. What consumed more of my thinking, more than the asset division, more than the house, more than the joint accounts we were methodically separating, was the question of Mia. I sat across from Daniel one afternoon in late November and laid it out plainly. I told him what I decided. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I respected most about him. I'm not going to contest custody, I said. I'm not going to fight for legal paternity. Mia is not my biological daughter. That is a fact. And the relationship I have with her, everything it was built on, was constructed on a lie I never consented to. I can love her. I do love her. But I cannot build the rest of my life on a foundation that was laid without my knowledge or my consent. Daniel was quiet for a moment. That's not the decision most men in your position make, he said carefully. You understand that it means walking away from the legal parental relationship entirely. I understand, I said. I'm not walking away from Mia the person. I'm stepping back from a legal status that was assigned to me through deception. Those are different things. He made a note. What about ongoing contact? That's between me and Mia, when she's old enough to understand the full picture. I said, right now, she needs stability. She needs her mother, whatever that looks like. She doesn't need a custody battle layered on top of everything else. Daniel nodded slowly. He wrote it down. And you're aware that relinquishing legal paternity, under these circumstances, also removes your financial obligation? I'm aware, I said. Kurt Strickland has been notified. He'll carry that responsibility. It belongs to him. We sat with that for a moment. Then Daniel moved on to the next item on the list, and I was grateful for that. He understood the difference between a decision that needed to be examined and one that had already been made. The house sold faster than I expected. A fair market listing, split down the middle per the agreement. I found an apartment in a building near uptown, 12 floors up, with a view of the city I hadn't known I'd want until I had it. I moved in with what I needed and left what I didn't. The furniture we'd bought together mostly stayed with Ella. I took the kitchen knives because I was the one who'd always cooked, and a reading chair that had been mine before the marriage. Everything else was replaceable. On a Thursday evening in December, I sat in that new apartment, takeout container on the counter, city lights visible through the window, and scheduled a follow-up appointment at the men's health clinic. Not to revisit the diagnosis, but to begin the conversation about what options existed on the other side of it. The physician I'd worked with was direct and knowledgeable. There were paths, treatments, things worth exploring when the time was right. I also called my brother that night. First real conversation we'd had in months. I told him most of it. He listened the way only an older brother can, without trying to fix anything or soften the edges. When I finished, he said, "You sound clearer than you have in years, Ed." I thought about that after I hung up. Clear was exactly the right word. Not healed. That was going to take longer. Not happy, exactly not yet. But clear. Like a window that had been filmed with condensation for years and had finally been wiped down. I could see out. That was enough for now. 4 months after Ella walked out of the house with one suitcase, the divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday morning in a courtroom on East Trade Street. I wore a jacket and tie out of habit. Daniel sat beside me. Ella's attorney sat across. The judge moved through the proceeding with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times and found it neither remarkable nor trivial. Just the ordered conclusion of a legal arrangement that had run its course. It was over in under 40 minutes. I shook Daniel's hand on the courthouse steps and thanked him. He told me I'd been one of his more organized clients. Coming from Daniel Mercer, I took that as high praise. I drove to my restaurant location on the south side. Not because I needed to be there, but because I wanted to be useful with my hands. I walked the floor, checked inventory with the operations manager, tasted 2 sauces that were being adjusted for the spring menu, and had a brief meeting about a staffing issue at our Plaza Midwood location. Ordinary, concrete work. The kind that doesn't ask anything of you except attention and judgment. By the time I got home to the apartment that evening, the tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders for 4 months had loosened to something more like ordinary fatigue. Kurt Strickland, per Daniel's last update, had formally acknowledged paternity through his attorney. His response to our legal correspondence had been measured and without hostility, a man dealing with the consequences of his own choices, which was not my concern. His daughters Sophie and Mia were still in the same class. I didn't know how that was being navigated, and I didn't need to. It was no longer my household to manage. Ella had moved into an apartment near her sister's place in Concord. Owen Marsh, from what Daniel's contacts gathered through the legal community, had not left Nadine. Whether that was reconciliation or inertia was not my business either. What was my business, what I had started to think about with something closer to anticipation than dread, was what came next for me. I went back to the men's health clinic in January. The specialist walked me through a range of treatment options: hormone supplementation, assisted reproductive protocols, a step-by-step approach that wasn't guaranteed, but wasn't without real possibility either. He was honest about the timeline and the probabilities. I respected that. I told him I wanted to explore the options seriously, and we set up a 3-month plan. I also spent a long evening in February writing out, not for anyone else, just for myself, the terms I intended to bring into any future relationship, not as a list of demands, but as the architecture of a life I was building with my eyes fully open this time. At the top of that list, honesty early and without exception. And beneath that, stated plainly, any woman I chose to build a family with would need to understand that I would require a paternity confirmation when a child was born. Not from suspicion, not as an accusation, but as a man who had learned, at significant cost, that love without verification in that specific context had nearly erased him. I was not willing to repeat that. I was not willing to raise another child I loved completely only to learn, through a manila envelope on a kitchen table, that the entire premise of that love had been a construction someone else had made for their own convenience. If a woman found that condition unacceptable, that told me everything I needed to know before we got any further. The Saturday before the divorce was finalized, I'd done one more thing. I drove to the park where I'd taken Mia dozens of times over the years, the one with the duck pond and the old wooden footbridge she always wanted to run across. I sat on the bench near the water for an hour. I wasn't there to mourn. I was there to mark the end of something, the way you mark the end of a long journey. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, just with presence. I thought about who I had been when I first took Mia to that park. 20 minutes of frisbee and a juice box and her delighted face when a duck got too close and startled her. I thought about the man I was now, sitting on the same bench 9 years later, with a cleaner understanding of the world and a quieter trust in my own judgment. I hadn't become harder. I didn't want to be harder. I just wanted to be awake, fully, consistently awake, in a way I hadn't been for most of my marriage. I drove home. I made dinner for one, which I'd gotten surprisingly good at. I sat by the window and ate while the city went dark below and the lights came on one by one, the way they always had, indifferent and steady. I was 42 years old. I had a good career, a city apartment with a view I was starting to like, a doctor who was helping me map a path forward, and a very clear picture of what I would and would not accept in the life ahead of me.